What the folk? What the folk? So relax and settle back, tune out the world, don't have a stroke. Cause life's about the journey, why not ride with what the folk? 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 What the folk?
And greetings, everyone. You're listening to WRFG What the Folk. I'm Mark, and today's program is on STAR, Southern Truth and Reconciliation. And what we're going to be doing this evening is interviewing a large number of people here tonight who are involved with this organization. And I'm going to let folks introduce themselves, and maybe the first person who introduces themselves can say what STAR is so people will know. And they're all looking at each other. Who's going to do this?
We'll start with Dr. Thee.
Dr. Thee.
I'm Fee Smith. Good evening. I am the chairman of the board of directors for Southern Truth and Reconciliation. STAR. We got started in 2003 as a social justice nonprofit. We were catalyzed into formation by the fact that there were some lynching souvenir postcards being exhibited at the Martin Luther King Historic Site, co-sponsored by the National Park Service and by Emory University, showing bodies of lynched victims that were souvenir postcards sent in the U.S. mails back around the 1900s. And they had been collected from estate sales and put on exhibit. We had also, at the same time, had Bishop Tutu visiting Atlanta, Emory University from South Africa, where he had chaired the Truth Commission there, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he was both teaching at Emory University and also going around the country encouraging U.S. Americans to do some truth and reconciliation work about our own issues of racial violence and conflict. And we took him up on it and formed STAR, Southern Truth and Reconciliation. I was a Emory University professor at the time, and now I'm board chair with STAR.
Thank you, Reverend Thee. And I wonder if the other rest of you will introduce yourselves. And actually, folks, you're old friends of the show. Let me also advise you, every time you move that squeaky mic, it makes people feel like somebody's, it's not good. So be careful with it. And if you do need to move it, let me know and I'll turn it down. This is public radio and everything is going on as we're here. And I think most of our audience knows that.
Absolutely.
Yes. So,
So I'm Andy Sheldon, and I came to STAR by way of the second Birmingham church bombing trial when I was being interviewed by a reporter, and he asked me, were there more cases like that and what could be done about that kind of violence in the South and in the nation? And I said, well, the model that we have to work from is the South African model, but we're hampered because we cannot grant immunity to people to testify. So I really don't know what we'll do. So I came back to Atlanta after that and was on a panel one time at the MLK Center as part of being an Emory alumnus panel, I think, and somebody said, "Do you know Thee Smith?" And I said, "No, I really don't." And the rest, they say, is history.
If you don't mind, Andy, you mentioned the trials that you were participating in, and maybe that deserves a little more explanation. I can say a little bit about what I know, and I think you'll help correct me if I get some things wrong, because I'm known for getting some things wrong periodically. But Andy Sheldon is an attorney and a trained psychologist, and he was a consultant in the retrials of 8 civil rights murder cases, including the murders of Medgar Evers, Vernon Dahmer, the 4 little girls in the church in Birmingham, and civil rights workers Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And played by Alec Baldwin in the movie. So you are well, all you guys are heroes of mine, but Andy is one of my oldest friends, so I have to say how much I love him and appreciate all that he's done and all that he's continuing to do.
Well deserved.
And so as we move on, Trent,
Yes.
So a little bit about yourself.
Outstanding. My name is Trent Frank, and I have the honor of working with these gentlemen as the executive director of STAR. And I came to STAR after retiring as a lieutenant colonel in the Army and ministry and pastoring and community organizing. And I was at Emory at Candler in particular, doing my Master of Divinity. And in my graduate assistant work during the summer, I met Dr. Smith. And we just kind of hit it off and talked. He told me a little bit about what he did and with STAR, and it engaged me. And said, well, we'll connect on that. And a little bit later on, he called me or emailed me and said, you expressed an interest. We have a work we're getting ready to do in LaGrange, Georgia. And we sure could use your input. And like Dr. Andy said, the rest is history. And so I'm glad to be here, glad to be in this role.
And we're going to be discussing the kinds of things you folks have been doing. And let's see, how many people are in the studio or in the outside studio? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 folks here, all involved with Southern Truth and Reconciliation.
Absolutely.
And of course, What the Folk is a music show, but we're going to be using musics to help us regroup ourselves as we try to get everyone a chance to say something about their involvement in what STAR means to them. So perhaps let me put on a song. I was about to say let me go into a song, but that would have been terrible if I start singing. There goes the entire audience. Also, let me say that if we're successful in all that we're doing with Simeon here operating the camera, we're going to upload our show, the interviews and music, to YouTube. So fingers crossed.
Yes.
And let me go to some music and we'll figure out what we're going to do next here, that we have a pretty good idea what we're going to do.
build the wall. My children, why do we build the wall?
Why do we build the wall? We build the wall to keep us free. That's why we build the wall. We build the wall to keep us free.
How does the wall keep us free? My children, how does the wall keep us free?
How does the wall keep us free? The wall keeps out the enemy. And we build the wall to keep us free. That's why we build the wall. We build the wall to keep us free.
Who do we call the have not, my children, because they want what we have got.
Because we have and they have not, because they want what we have got. The enemy is poverty, and the wall keeps out the enemy. And we build a wall to keep us free. That's why we build a wall. We build a wall to keep us free.
What do we have that they should want? My children, my children. What do we have that they should want?
What do we have that they should want? We have a wall to work upon. We have work that they have none, and our work is never done. My children, and the war is never won. The enemy is poverty, and the wall keeps out the enemy. And we build a wall to keep us free.
That's why we build a wall.
We build a
We build a wall to keep us free. We build a wall to keep us free.
I've been playing that song on this show for years. It was an obscure song by someone who wrote a folk opera, and much to everyone's amazement and surprise and delight, it became a Broadway hit and then won all kinds of awards. But this woman wrote the song about 10 or 11 years ago, and maybe longer. And it was before the current administration and before people talked about the wall, and it seems so relevant now. Tonight's program is on the STAR, Southern Truth and Reconciliation, and perhaps one of our guests here can say a little bit about what is racial conciliation. Let me also advise people call in, and they usually call while we're talking, and we aren't taking calls. So the best time to call and say something to either me or have some questions for any of our guests is when we're playing music.
That explains the bright light.
The bright light is the phone ringing, and they heard me. Thank you. They stopped. It's a nope. I'm sorry. There they are again, or someone else. Who knows? But anyway, so I am asking the question: what is racial reconciliation?
Okay. All right. Gentlemen, I have to step in here. It's very rare to really work with people that are truly, genuinely humble. And that is something that describes both Dr. Thee and Dr. Andy. And I find myself having to talk a lot about them because they won't talk about themselves, and they defer to the people around them, which is just an honor to actually be around. But on that question of what is reconciliation, I'll ask Thee to start off. Sure. Because what he might not say about himself is that Dr. Thee is a practitioner of racial reconciliation and has been trained and has practiced it worldwide. And so as we talk about what racial reconciliation is, one of our founders is definitely an expert in that regard. Dr. Thee?
Yeah, I'll use Bishop Tutu's formula. He promoted the formula. This is Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who chaired South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as a native South African, he was experienced with lots of conflict, racial conflict, apartheid, segregation in South Africa of African peoples by European heritage folks. And he formulated the definition of reconciliation as forgiveness plus truth. Forgiveness plus truth equaling reconciliation. I have a colleague, a scholarly colleague, who describes forgiveness as willing the well-being of both victims and victimizers with the fullest possible knowledge of the nature of the violation. Willing the well-being of both victims and victimizers with the fullest possible knowledge of the violations going on as forgiveness. And so if you can face the hard truth of what's happened in racial conflict between different groups of people across history, and then find your way to wish well-being to both parties on both sides of those conflicts, that's reconciliation.
If I might, we've talked before. It was a few years ago that you guys were here, and every time I tried to describe what you folks do, people go, all right, so you go and talk to people who were violent against civil rights workers, who burned crosses on people's lawns, who murdered or attempted to murder people because of their race or their creed or their beliefs. It sounds... thank you. Right. Thank you, Lord.
We don't need to go on any further. We've arrived.
That's somebody's GPS. Okay, back to point. Live radio.
Right.
And
nothing like it.
Nothing like it. So I'm hoping that you folks are going to be able to give people a real understanding why this is something that works, something that's important, something that's for our the betterment of our souls if we are going to get along as human beings in this crazy world. With that in mind, maybe someone can tell me some more about STAR's mission. That you're an organization that has a purpose, and obviously, Dr. Thie was giving us a pretty good idea that it involves everyone, the victims and the perpetrators, and you folks act as a conduit for these things to happen, perhaps. Help me.
So one of the things that both you and Thie brought up was the understanding the fullness of the victimization, the fullness of the violence, the fullness of the criminality that's involved in this racially motivated violence. And I have to say a bit about that just because I'm at sort of the first stage of this dawning awareness of how much violence there has been and how much there continues to be and what it looks like. So that as sort of typical white guys, we think about the Klan, or we think about cross burnings, or we think about, but we don't generally think about the fact that if you were growing up in 1960 in southern Mississippi, you spent every waking moment scared that something bad was going to happen to you. Perhaps you had shotguns in the corners of your house so that you could defend yourself if something happened. Your church might be burned with you in it. You know, the stuff that could happen to you, or you could be accused of whistling at a white woman and end up at the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. You know, it just is every time you turn around, there is something there to be dealt with. And so that's the point I wanted to make about the fullness realization, the full realization of the scope of the violence.
And you're saying something about the past, and obviously a lot of this reconciliation is about things that have happened, and yet at the same time things are happening. Things do seem to be rolling backwards at a speed that's somewhat frightening. But yes, I'm getting a sense of what you do. Of course, at some point I'm going to ask you for some examples. You don't have to say names as much as what kinds of folks you brought together and tell us what happened, how it happened. I'm interested in successes as well as things that weren't as successful as you would have liked. So, Trent, you were going to...
Yes, definitely. Specifically, I'm sort of the organizer, voice, or piece of the team. And so, specifically and operationally, we pull organizations together that are about the work of identifying this pain from the past, which impacts the current and keeps communities separated and divided. And we do training that starts at one level in the area of diversity and expands all the way into realms of identity, role-playing, realms of healing communities that have been broken by current or past racial events, particularly in the case of violence. Leaves a scar, leaves a pain, as Dr. Andy just got through saying. So locally and around the state in particular, we have worked with these organizations to bring that healing, to bring an awareness, first of all, of historically what has happened in these communities, and brought an awareness of its current impact, and then helped in the healing process around those events. In LaGrange, we helped that process in LaGrange, and currently we're doing that here in Fulton County and DeKalb County as well.
And we're going to get into some of that in just a bit. Given that this is a station, even though we're not commercial, we still have public service announcements and some other things to play, and then a little bit of music. And in the meantime, we'll all be talking about what we're going to bring up next with regards to how this all works. So let me get to some of the things that I'm asked to do here, and then we'll get back to some conversation. While things are going on that are recorded, like music and announcements, this is the time that you might make a call if you have something that you'd like me to ask any of our guests, or something that you think is important for me to know during the course of this program. So let's get to this, the things I have to play here.
And now a message from our Public Affairs Bulletin Board.
The Black experience extends beyond the written word. Auburn Avenue Research Library this December. Our events calendar is packed full of entertainment and programs. All programs are open to the public. Located at 101 Auburn Avenue, Northeast Atlanta, Georgia, 3033, found in the historic Auburn Avenue District. An experience awaits you. In a conversation with the library's community dialogue and discussion every Wednesday at 6. A documentary highlighting the history of gospel music, the Emmanuel AME church shooting, and an exploration of traditional burial and funeral practices will be screened. December the 4th, Rejoice and Shout. December the 11th, Emmanuel Baptist, as well as December the 18th, Homegoing. Our lecture and book signing programs include Shelter in the Time of Storm, How Black Colleges Foster Generations of Leadership and Activism, December the 8th at 3 o'clock, for a historical cultural celebration. A live stream performance of Gilman Mata, Sunday, December the 6th at 9 a.m., and our annual Kwanzaa celebration, December the 30th, 3 o'clock on a Monday. For more information, 404-613-4010 or afpls.org/AARL.
Okay, we're back on the air, and I thought that maybe you can perhaps, we're talking to folks from STAR, Southern Truth and Reconciliation. We never know when people tune in, so they could be just tuning in just this moment and saying, what is this? And we have guests in the studio on What the Folk are talking about some of the work that they do with reconciliation between folks involved in the civil rights movement and people who were victimizers of people of other races, such as the KKK and other organizations. And what this organization does, STAR, is that they find ways to foment reconciliation, and I'm going to let them explain it for you. So does anyone want to give some kind of example or some kind of information about to help people understand what you do?
Sure. So this is Thee Smith again. I'm board chair for Southern Truth and Reconciliation and former Emory University professor. And as part of our work, we were made aware of the 1906 Atlanta race riot and decided to create a centennial event in 2006 to commemorate the 100-year anniversary. It lasted 4 days in 1906. White men in downtown Atlanta who had been whipped into a frenzy by claims that black men were raping white women in downtown Atlanta. This was fictitious. It had been fomented by the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution. And so for 4 days, they took it on themselves to defend their women, having been set up by the media. We did a 4-day conference in 2006 discovering how it is that the Journal, Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution, the two papers of the time, newspapers of the time, had fabricated this misinformation, and they came forward and described their role in that. Interestingly, at the same time, the Katrina disaster had been occurring in New Orleans, and similar kinds of media distortions of black violence, black crime, was going on in that context. And so, after 4 days, we got a better understanding of what creates that kind of a race riot and how not to continue to do that in the future. So STAR got the city's Phoenix Award for our efforts to make sure that we unearth the past enough to make sure it doesn't continue into the future.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so, absolutely. So that is one of the highlight works that STAR has done, commemorating and recognizing the Sam Holes lynching, the Morris Ford Bridge lynching, even helping to recognize the Leo Frank lynching. And these, again, were works that came from an original passion of STAR, as Dr. Thee said earlier, an inspiration that came from the postcard exhibit about lynching. So the early work was around the recognizing, or what is commonly understood now as remembrance, of these divisive and painful, violent events that are an extension of white supremacy and terrorism, and then bringing that remembrance into some form of current coalition building and reconciliation and recognition today, so that the folks that were harmed by it, communities that were divided by it, are even to this day healed and are moving forward in the process. It's a part of the restorative justice process. And we'll see in some of our artwork picture of Andy at Morris Ford. Andy, did you want to say anything about that experience? Morris Ford lynchings, which are highlighted by a film now called Always in Season. Andy and Thee were present there, and Andy, I know it was poignant.
Well, part of what is happening nationwide now, but particularly in the South, is the awareness, the dawning awareness of people who were killed violently and racially at one time or another. And so at some point early on, it was discovered that there were 4 people, 2 couples in 1946 who were taken, put in a truck, taken out to the Morris Ford Bridge and murdered. One of the wives was pregnant at the time, so actually there were 5 people who were murdered at that time. And so that's known as the Morris Ford murders. As a result of that, by the way, Dr. King was in Memphis during the labor marches and unrest at the time, and was scheduled to come to Winder to meet with Bobby Howard when he was shot. So it was in Winder that Bobby was, I think, living at the time, and they were going to do some work around the Morris Ford murders. Since that time, a great deal has been done. However, after years and years of trying to get records released, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation refused to close the case. By keeping it open, they kept the records from being open records. But within the past 6 months, they have released the records. I have not seen them, but I think there are people who have.
Were there political reasons why things were suppressed?
Where do you live?
Where you live, right. Oh, goodness. Oh, my.
Yeah, there were, for sure.
Yes.
Political, cultural, the same thing that we have seen historically and still see to this very day. Records being suppressed, and I mean, we could just go on and on. But I think you're ready to play some music.
I think we're going to play some public service announcements, and we'll be back in a minute or two.
Okay.
So,
Hey now, this is Russ Still. I want to invite you to WRFG's Ormwood Opry and Holiday Buffet coming up Saturday, December the 7th. Our occasional concert series returns to the Ormwood Church for an evening of fine food and great music. We'll be starting the night with the acoustic folk blues of Veronica Jackson.
I'm going down that long, long highway.
Next is Mandy Stakota. You're going to be mighty impressed with her.
These shoes keep good time.